Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the screen that you first get to when you log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients that you've added in. And so for today's session, I'm going to be taking you through a spouse client file from start to finish, and it's going to be a really open-ended session. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to either just unmute yourself and jump in with your question, or you can send it through the Zoom chat if that's easier. So to get started, we're going to add a client. So we're just going to go up to the add button. And for any client, the key things are first name and last name. So I'm going to put in Ben Collins. You can put in the middle name, but it's optional. Email field, that's there if you want to send the client the online questionnaire. So you put in their email, you'd click this use questionnaire box, and then when you went to add them to the system, you'd be prompted to either send the questionnaire directly from eState Planner, or you could copy a special link that you can send to the client from your own email. And that way you can sort of customize the email a bit more. So you have those two options, and then the client's going to get an email and they're going to click on the link. Then they're going to be able to be prompted to create a password just so that their information stays secure and so that they can come back into it and fill in. They don't have to do all of the questionnaire in one sitting. And then they go through and enter in their profile, family tree, asset, and debt information. And anything they put in that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate into your system. So it's going to save a lot of time with the manual entry. But you don't have to use the questionnaire. So if you like to use your own questionnaire, maybe you have a PDF or Word version that you like to use, or you like to just collect all that information in the actual client meeting, then you just don't have to worry about putting an email in, and don't click the use questionnaire box, and then it's not going to send off a questionnaire. Then we'll just go ahead and add in Ben. So since today we're doing a spouse client file, this means that we want to do documents for both spouses. And that means that we need to add them both as separate clients to the system. And then we can link them together using the spouse client function. So we're going to go up to the add button, and then we're going to enter the spouse's information in. So we're going to call her Lauren Collins. And then the key field here is this spouse client field right here. So you click on it and you pick the name of the other spouse. So you need to have added the first spouse in normally to make sure that their information is in the system. And then when you're adding the second spouse, this is when you do the spouse client function, because the first spouse needs to already be in the system in order to appear in that drop-down list. And linking them together is going to mean that any shared family tree or joint asset information is going to automatically populate in both of their profiles. And it's also going to allow you to sync the planning between the two profiles. So if it's a mirror will situation, you can sync all the scenarios and appointments between the two, so you don't have to do it twice. And then you're just going to decide who you want to start with, and you click on their name to go into their profile. So we're going to start with Ben. And this is what it's going to look like if you haven't sent out the questionnaire. So you're going to start with the client and the spouse. And so the client's icon, when you click on it, it's going to be highlighted in black. That's going to show that they're the client. Anyone else on the family tree is going to be in blue. And usually what I like to do first is edit the client's information. So do that by just double clicking on the client, and then it's going to bring up all of this additional information. And really the key fields are going to be first name, last name, and gender, just so you're making sure the wording of the will comes out properly. Also known as for the client will populate in the will. So it won't for anyone else, but for the client specifically, the also known as field will populate. Date of birth, you can put in the date of birth, let's say June 7th, 1950, and it will automatically populate that age for you. Country of birth, you can pick a country, you can do multiple citizenship, single citizenship. And then if you scroll down, all this other information, this is good to have on your client, but it's not going to affect the will generation itself. Then residency is important because however you set the province as here is how the system's going to know which precedents to generate. So if you're from BC or Nova Scotia or Alberta, you're going to want to make sure to change the province to make sure that not only the correct precedents are generating for your province, but also on the Assets tab, it's going to affect how probate tax is calculated. The city field, this will populate in the will. So it will say Ben of the City of Toronto. In special circumstances, this is where you can note down if the client has any capacity issues. You want to make sure this is really well documented in case there's a will challenge down the line. Then relationships is just going to tell you sort of who the client's related to on the family tree. So this is a section where if you've inputted a relationship incorrectly, so for example, maybe you've inputted a child as a sibling accidentally, you can fix it using this relationship section here, rather than having to delete them and re-add. So now we've dealt with Ben. Let's say we wanted to add a child. So adding anyone to the family tree works through direct relationships. So whoever icon you're clicked on is who you're going to be adding to. So if I want to add Ben's child, I'm going to click on Ben's icon, go to the add button, click child. And whenever you're adding a child, you're going to get this prompt as to who the other parent is. Is it Lauren Collins, the current spouse? Is it a new parent, the ex-spouse who is going to be involved in the will, so you do want to add them to the family tree? Or are they a single parent? So either they're genuinely a single parent or there's an ex-spouse that isn't going to be involved. Let's just say that it's Lauren. And then we'll be entering the child's information. So we're going to call him John Collins, male, date of birth, July 19th, 2000. And then the special circumstances section for anyone that's not the client is a place where you can note sort of relationship difficulties or estrangement to the client, but it's also where you can note if the individual is disabled or not. And if they are disabled, you're going to want to make sure to check off this box, because later on in the scenario section, when you're creating a trust for them, and it's fully discretionary to the death of the beneficiary, that's going to ensure that the proper Henson trust wording is going to draft in the document. So you want to make sure first to indicate that they're disabled on the People tab. Let's say we wanted to add a grandchild next. So since it works through direct relationships, we can't just add a grandchild directly to Ben. What we have to do is add a child to Ben, click on the child's icon, and add a child to that child. We're going to say he's a single parent. And this is how you would get the grandchild's information onto the family tree. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You would click on the client's icon, add a sibling to the client, click on the sibling's icon, add a child to the sibling. If there's anybody else that's going to be involved in the will in a beneficiary or a trustee capacity, and they don't fit on the family tree, you can go to this All People tab over here. And it's going to list everybody that you've added into the system, so all the family tree members, but it's also going to be a place where you can add other people who aren't family that are going to be involved in the will. So you just go up to the add button. Let's say Jordy's going to be involved later on. So I'm going to put his information in here. And then I'm going to be able to indicate what his relationship is. So who is he related to? He's related to the client. What's the relationship? Let's say he's a friend. And now Jordy's going to be in the system. So later when I'm choosing beneficiaries or trustees, I'll be able to choose him as an option from the drop-down list. So that is the People tab. Does anyone have any questions about this section? No? Okay, we'll keep going, but if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to just unmute yourself, or you can send it to the Zoom chat if that's easier. The next section is assets. This is where you're going to list all of your clients' different assets that they've added into the system. And you're always going to start with general personal effects, just to remind you to gift them in the initial gift section, as it's going to generate a special disposition of personal effects clause. For any other assets, the only assets that you need to add in this section are those that are going to be specific asset bequests or registered assets that you want to confirm or do new designations for in the will. You can technically add in all the client's assets and give them a nice sense of what their estate's looking like, but for the will generation itself, the only ones that you need to add in are the specific asset request or the registered assets that you want in the will. So let's add a couple in. You just go to the add button, then you pick your category and then your type. And really the key field for any asset that you're adding into the system is this asset name field. I like to put all the identifying information in this field here so that if I'm adding in multiple bank accounts, they're not all called bank account or bank account copy. That'll get confusing as to which is which. But if I know this is the RBC bank account and the next one I add in is the CIBC savings account, I can make sure that I'm planning for the correct asset in the system. And also it's going to be how the asset's referred to in the will if it is going to be a specific asset request. You don't have to put the balance or the value in, but if you do, it's going to calculate the probate tax for you according to whatever you've set the client's residency as. And it's also going to make the graphic scenario summary look a lot nicer if you put in values. It'll give you a better sense of what's going where. And then we'll just add this bank account. Next, let's say real estate home. Maybe they have multiple homes. This one's the family home. You could change that asset name. The address field, if it is going to be a specific request, this address field will populate in the will. Current value, let's say it's $1 million. You have this mortgage/encumbrances field. And if there is a mortgage on the property, you're going to want to put the value of the mortgage right in this field here. Because not only is it good to know what asset the debt is associated with, but it also has an effect on how much probate tax is calculated for this asset. The next section is debts, and on the debts tab, it'll give you the opportunity to add a mortgage in there as well. But you really want to make sure that if it's associated with the specific asset that you're adding into the system, just add it in this field and don't add it as a separate debt on the debts tab. Just want to make sure you're not adding it in both places because it will double count it. So best practice is just add it in this field and don't add it as a separate mortgage debt on the debts tab. Ownership, you can change it to joint, tenants in common. Let's say it's joint and joint with a spouse. And now this family home asset, if we switch over to her profile, we can see it's in her list of assets now as well. So we don't have to do that again twice. It'll save us some time there. Let's do one more. We'll go for an RSP. So again, I'm going to change it so that all the identifying information is in that asset name field. Beneficiary field, this is just whoever the current beneficiary is on the policy. So you can put their information in, but you'll still be able to decide if you want to confirm or do a new designation in the will later on in the scenario section. And then before you generate, you can determine whether or not you want it included. Current value, let's say it's $100,000. So the probate tax always automatically calculates, but the income tax doesn't. And this is just due to the variability of different clients' tax brackets. So what we usually like to do is estimate the highest possible tax that an asset could incur. So for something like an RRSP, we put in like 50% of that. For something like an asset with a capital gain, we would do like 25% of that gain, just to show an estimate of the taxes that they're looking at. So that's the asset section. Are there any questions here? Nope. Okay. We'll keep going to debt. That's just really more for planning. It's not going to affect the generation of the will. We're not going to add a mortgage because we already put it on the assets tab and we don't want to double count it. But let's just say we wanted to put in a credit card debt and you just add that in there. Now we'll get to scenarios. So this is really where all the planning occurs. And the idea is that there's 3 scenarios, depending on your client's situation, and you go through each one and create a plan so that your bases are covered no matter what happens. So you start with surviving spouse. This is the plan if the client, if the spouse is still alive when the client's passed away. Then you go to descendants only. So there's no client, no spouse, but there's kids or grandkids around. And lastly, no descendants. So no client, no spouse, no kids, no grandkids, ultimate disaster, what's happening here. And there's two ways you can go about planning the scenarios. The first is manually. So you click into a scenario and you go through each section. So the joint designated asset section, this is where you're going to put anything that's joint or designated to another individual to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, this is where you create your specific asset requests or your cash legacy. And balance of the estate, this is how you're dividing up the residue, either by adding segments and gifts within the segments, if it's a more complicated residue breakdown, or by running a macro, if it meets one of our pre-populated residue breakdowns. You can do it that way, but if you're dealing with a typical client situation where it's like everything to spouse, everything to kids, then you can go to this little lightning bolt button up in the top corner, and it's called E-plans. And these are like giant macros that go through the scenarios and appointment sections for you and create a plan. And the nice thing about these is, even if it doesn't match all of the exact details that you want for your plan, if it matches some, you could run it, and then you can go into each scenario and make any changes that you want. But it'll just give you a starting point so you don't have to start from scratch. So I'm going to run this last one. And now I'm in the surviving spouse scenario. In the joint designated asset section, it's given the RSP and the home to Lauren to show it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, it's given the general personal effects to Lauren because this is going to trigger that special disposition of personal effects clause coming up in the will. And then the balance of the estate, it's created a segment going to Lauren, absolute 100%. There's no gift over because that second scenario, descendants only, that's going to be our gift over. So we don't need to put anything here. So I don't need to make any changes to this scenario. This is exactly what I would have wanted to do. So I can just go to the second one. Nothing that's joint or designated. Initial gifts, it's got the general personal effects going to the children. Let me just show you how you would do it manually if you had to. So for any specific asset request, all the assets that you've added into the system are going to appear as these green boxes over here. And what you're going to do is you're just going to drag and drop it over. You can pick people, you can do classes or charity. We're going to do the class of children. And then whenever you're gifting to a class or multiple people for the general personal effects, then you're going to get this distribution method section. That's going to be where you can specify how you want the personal effects distributed. So you can say the discretion, as beneficiaries agree, a lottery, or an other. You can do multiple as well if you want. And for the balance of the estate, I'm going to click on this gray bar. It's going to tell me it's going to the children in a trust, 100%. Same trustees as executors. The duration is when the beneficiary reaches age 30. I want to change it to 25 instead. Mandatory payments, I'm going to change this as well. So at 21, I want them to get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over, first to their issue, then to the other class members, to the other children. And then I will save. And so now I've worked off of the E-plan, but I've ultimately created the trust with the details that my client wanted. And if I want to sync this scenario over to Lauren, if Lauren's going to want the same descendants only scenario plan in her will, I just click this little spouse sync button. And it's going to copy everything I've done in this scenario. So the residue breakdown, anything that's joint, and it's going to copy it over to Lauren's descendants only scenario. The only thing that's not going to copy over are solely owned assets because it wouldn't be their asset to give away. And the last scenario is no descendants. So here we're probably just dealing with the balance of the estate. And the E-plan has made it so that half goes to siblings and half goes to spouses' siblings. I could just clear it and technically not even plan for this scenario if maybe I had a really big family, lots of kids and grandkids, and I didn't think it was ever going to get to this point. But let's say I do want to create a plan. I want to give half to Jordy and half to a charity. So I'm going to do this manually by creating segments and gifts within the segment. So since I want it to go 50-50, I'm going to start by creating segment 1 for 50%. Now I have to specify what's happening with this 50%, and I do that by adding a gift. I'm going to pick Jordy. Absolute 100%. This means 100% of the 50% segment. So I want all of the 50% to go to Jordy. I don't want to divide it up even further. And let's put in a gift over to his issue, and then we'll add. Now, if I look at the green circles, I can see that of this outer 50%, I've dealt with 100% of it. So I don't want to add any more gifts or anything here because I've already given all this 50% away. What I need to do is deal with the other 50%. I do that by clicking on this grayed out segments button to bring me back to the main segments page. And then I'll add my second segment for the other 50%. Now I'll add my gift. I'm going to do a charity this time. You can search right on the search bar, and it's going to search the CRA database for you. So if you click on the little eye, it'll show you it's got all of the information. It's got the CRA number and everything that will populate in the will. And I'm going to pick the charity Epilepsy Toronto. Done. And then I will just add this in. So now I can see of this 50%, I've dealt with 100%, and therefore I've dealt with 100% of everything. And I can sync this over to Lauren as well if she's going to want the same for her no descendant scenario. So that's the scenario section. I know it can be a lot to sort of take in, but does anyone have any questions here? No? Okay. We'll keep going to the next section then. The next section is appointment. This is where you're going to appoint your estate trustees and your guardians if you need to. Because we ran the e-plan, it's already made the spouse the primary estate trustee. But to add anyone else, you're just going to go to the add button. You can do people or trust corporations. If you select that specific trust corporation, their clauses will populate in the will. Let's say our next appointee is going to be Jordy. And then the condition is really what makes them either primary and alternate. So if they're primary, you're going to select none, so no condition. If they're an alternate, you're going to put a condition. And usually I pick if all specified cannot act. And then I make sure the name on the specified line is correct. So right now it's going to say Lauren. If Lauren can't act, Jordy. Maybe I wanted to do a further alternate. I'm going to go ahead and pick the same condition, but I'm going to change the specified to Jordy. So now it's going to go Lauren. If Lauren can't act, Jordy. If Jordy can't act, John. And we can sync with this little spouse sync button up in the top corner. And the last thing we're going to go over today is provisions. So the first thing is funeral arrangements. If you want those in the will, you can just type them on the line. If not, just get rid of this text and there won't be a body disposition clause in the will. Include future members is how the class is going to be defined in the will, whether you want to include future members of the class. So if I click this children box, it'll define children as John Collins and any other child born to or adopted by me and my spouse. Class restrictions. This is going to be where you can restrict certain members of being part of a class. Trust for beneficiaries under a certain age. This is your general trust clause that's going to guide underage beneficiaries that you haven't set up specific trusts for. So right now we have the duration as 25, but you can change it if you want to a different age. And the last thing is secondary will assets. So if you're doing a primary and secondary, so you're doing multiple wills, this is where you can pick and choose which definitions you want included in the secondary will. So if you're just doing a single will, you don't have to worry about checking or unchecking anything. It won't have an effect. It's only if you're generating multiple wills. Then up in the top corner, this little circle with the exclamation point in it are called advisor insights. And they're like contextual alerts that are advising you of anything that you might have missed in the software, certain planning things you might want to consider. Some of them will go away. Like if I went back and put in the gender for Lauren, this one would disappear. I'll come back to that question in just a second. But some of them will always be there, like request prior wills and powers of attorney. So someone asked, how do you appoint joint POAs? So the POA section works the exact same as the appointment. and you just do it with a condition. So if Lauren's the primary and I want Jordy to be joint with Lauren, I'm going to set the same condition, so none. So now Lauren and Jordy are going to be joint. If you want to change it to joint and several, you just click on decision making and change it. But if you want it to be joint, you could keep it as joint. So you just appoint them with the same condition. Then this other thing up here, these are notes. So you can make notes on your client. These notes appear at the end of the text scenario summary. So if you're giving that summary to clients, just be wary of what kind of notes you include. And then the last button, this is your generation button. So this is where you generate your documents and your summary. So first of all, there's 3 summaries you can generate. There's the profile. That's going to give you all the information that the clients put in the questionnaire or that you've put in for them. So here's all of the details on their profile, all the people on their family tree, all the assets and the debts as well. This can be good to give to the client after the planning meeting so that they can sort of review the information, make sure spelling of names and asset details are correct. The second one is the graphic scenario summary. So it's going to give you a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios. And if you're putting in those asset values on the asset tab, it's going to look a lot nicer. It's going to give you a sense of what's going where and how much is in the estate at this point in time. And then the last one is the text scenario summary. So it's going to give you a nice sort of layout of all of the information. So who are the POAs, who are the estate trustees, what gifts you've created, how you've divided up the residue. So it's essentially the will without the legalese. It's just got all of that information. Those are the summaries. Then you've got your documents. So these are all the different documents that you can generate with the system. Today, we're just going to do a single will. So you just click on single will, you check off these 2 boxes. You can always change the signing date or you can take it out. It's up to you. Registered asset designation. This is if you want to include, so you either want to confirm or do new designations for the registered assets in the will. Joint designated asset confirmation is basically something that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held in a resulting trust. Counterpart is if you're signing in counterpart. Simplified is a shorter will with less definitions and powers. A will guide is a nice little chart at the end of the will that guides to the different clauses. And a cover page is just a cover page. Then you can pick witnesses as anyone who's a user on your account. And you can generate your affidavits of execution as well. Then you just click generate, and it's going to give you a Word document that's fully editable, so you can make any changes that you want. I'll just go through it briefly. Funds and plans, this is if you click the registered asset box. Assets passing outside of the will is if you click the joint asset box. Here's our definitions. My children means John and Anna, their child born to, because we click that future children box on the provisions tab. Here's our appointments. Lauren, if not Lauren, Jordy, if not Jordy, John. Here's the funeral arrangement. Here's the special disposition of personal effects clause that generates when you gift those general personal effects as an initial gift in the scenario. And here's the residue. So Lauren, if not Lauren, this trust for the children. Ultimately, half to Jordy, half to Epilepsy Toronto. And if we scroll all the way down, we get to our nice little will guide at the end that guides to the different clauses. So that's how you would go through it. One other thing I just want to point out is this little question mark button that's up in the corner. So if you click on that, it's going to bring you right to our help desk. That's got lots of sort of articles on how to do different things in the system, but it also has courses, specifically the eState Planner Certification course, which is a self-paced course. It's free, and it'll teach you how to learn the system really well. So it'll go through everything you need to know. It'll take you through a client file and all the different stages of the planning with the system. So I'd recommend checking this out if you're trying to get to learn the system better. That about wraps it up for today. Does anyone have any final questions before we go? No? Okay, well, if you do come across anything later, don't hesitate to reach out. You can email support, you can email me directly. Someone's going to be happy to jump on a Zoom and help you through it. But thanks again for joining me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.